Look, if OpenTelemetry doesn't work for you today, with excluding maybe logging, then there's something wrong with you.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 258, Reflections on Startup Infrastructure Choices. This episode of DevOps Paradox is brought to you by Barbaro Mojo. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darin and Viktor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darin reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Viktor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darin Pope and Viktor Farsic. Back on February 1st, Jack's Home on the Web, not Home on the Range, but Jack's Home on the Web, published an article, Almost Every Infrastructure Decision I Endorse or Regret After 4 Years Running Infrastructure at a Startup. Now, this is a long post, and if you haven't read it yet, you need to. Viktor, what is your thoughts about this post?
I mean, there are a few things I might not fully agree, a few others that are kind of misleading, but in general, I readily agree with most of the things of anything, and I do now for this one.
Are you saying that you don't agree with yourself on a lot of things?
Oh, I don't agree with myself on almost anything. I think that I'm just ridiculous.
We're going to take a look at some of the points, and we're not going to go through all the points, but down in the episode description, there will be a link off to this post. I'm recommending that you read it. I think Viktor is recommending that you read it because you might find some things that you really need to consider doing differently in your shop, whether you're a startup or not. So, number one, picking AWS over Google Cloud. That doesn't seem like a really hard decision to make.
That's the misleading part when you look at only the title, right? If it's only like picking AWS over Google Cloud, I would say, depends, right? But afterwards, when he explains that actually the reason for picking one over the other is support, then I'm fully on board.
Because they are a Kubernetes-based shop, and you would think, okay, GCP, let's go with GKE, or any of the flavors that are built on top of GKE, but support. No matter how much it costs, you can get it from AWS.
Yeah, that's where AWS really excels. So if the question is AWS or Google for support, then to me, he's 100% right. It's AWS.
Now, staying in the vein of AWS, they picked EKS. Now, I don't know that I would pick EKS, not because of EKS, but if all I'm trying to do is run containers, do I really need EKS?
I mean, let's say, are you running more than 10 containers? If the question is no, then you don't need it. If the answer is yes, then yeah, right? But what he really wanted to say in that part, if I remember correctly, is that it's not a question whether to use Kubernetes or no, right? The question is EKS or shall I roll up my own sleeves and do it myself? So managed versus self-managed Kubernetes. I believe that that's really the choice here. Again, he has very misleading titles, right? But if it's managed versus not self-managed Kubernetes, then managed Kubernetes any time of the day. Unless you are really having specific needs that cannot be accomplished otherwise, or you cannot afford it under any circumstance and you prefer to end up with higher costs because you're going to hire more people and things like that. But managed Kubernetes over self-managed any time of the day.
In case you haven't read this yet, anytime you look at each section of this post, you're going to see either an endorse with a green box or a regret with a yellow box. So up to this point, AWS and EKS both are endorse. But the next one, at least in this list, was EKS managed add-ons. And they regretted it. For the reason that sometimes you need to make a configuration change, and guess what? It's managed, you can't.
There is a difference between something being well integrated into a product, right? Like Cilium in GK would be such an example, right? Kind of. And then vast majority of others are simply, hey, you can check this box instead of executing Helm install. And I believe that he's talking about those add-ons, right? Simply that save you from installing it yourself and not much more. There is no tight integration. There is no real optimization. And in that case, yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not saving any time and you're just creating potential complications later on. Because if your trouble is to execute Helm install, then you have much bigger troubles than add-ons.
Agreed. Now, through the rest of this section, he goes into ECR and RDS and the other things, and all of those things are endorsements. Glad he made the decision that he went with a managed service. But you get to the bottom of the section, and the last regret is AWS premium support. Now, we talked about getting support from AWS. That's a great thing. But they regretted the premium support.
It's expensive. I'm not sure whether that's a regrettable decision. It's more like, do you really need that level of support, right? Do you need to be ahead of anybody else in the queue and so on and so forth, right? And if you have to, then you have to. Then, when you absolutely must do something, then you must do something. Then the cost is irrelevant. But for vast majority of people, yes, premium support is very expensive if you don't have a real need for that.
Now, let's go ahead and move into the process section of the post. The first item was automating post-mortem processes with a Slack bot. And they endorse this. Good idea.
I'm not. That's one of the things I'm not sure, really. Slack bot, I mean, there's a lot of writing to be done there. There's a lot of data that should be collected. I'm not 100% sure what they're doing with Slackbot, but I'm not very fond of Slackbots being anything but notifications. And chat, of course.
Well, I'm wondering, based on how they wrote it up here, they didn't want a human being the bad guy saying, hey, you need to go write up this postmortem, or you need to go do this. I'm used to seeing those kinds of things in Slack all the time. And it's like, oh, it's the bot reminding me I forgot. Yeah, okay, sure, why not?
Yeah, if it's about scheduling postmortem or something like that, then yeah, of course.
As long as it's in context for you, you're okay with it. But if we're just trying to dump it off on the bot, probably not such a great idea.
Exactly.
You mean humans are still necessary in 2024? Are you kidding?
I mean, I'm still learning more from humans than from machines.
Are you sure about that?
I'm using machines to do my bidding, but not necessarily learning from them. From their opinions.
Okay. Next item, using PagerDuty's incident templates. Okay, I'm going to sort of divert away from this one for just a second. If a vendor is providing you templates to use their product, use them until it doesn't make sense to not use them. Agree or disagree?
You mean when communicating with that vendor, or?
No. When a vendor gives you a template to follow in doing something, like it's PagerDuty. I don't know what the template is, but let's say, okay, a standard Sev1 remediation type process is this. And you're not used to doing that, especially in that vendor's tool. Them handing you a template, it's like, okay, will this work for me now or not? At least give it a shot at least once, right?
That's almost always a good starting point. You want to change templates or vendors' opinions when you know better. And you don't know better until you have certain experience with that something. I really dislike when the starting point is kind of, okay, we're going to adopt PagerDuty. What do I do the first day? Change the templates or create my own ones? No. I have full respect. I do think that we should be changing them and adapting them to our own needs, but that comes later. And this is equally valid for anything else, right? Oh, I know how to assemble Kubernetes myself instead of using ready-to-go Kubernetes by somebody. No, use ready-to-go Kubernetes by somebody until you really know what works better for you. Same thing for templates, same thing for anything.
I'm going to go back to, well, I guess we would talk about the time that's now. If you go to AWS today, day one for you on Kubernetes, and you use kops to create your own Kubernetes cluster versus just using EKS, you're doing it wrong.
I would go even further and say, even for that same Kubernetes, because EKS is really a bunch of different things. It's not only EKS. There is a bunch of resources that are involved there, right? Go to AWS website, find the solution that they already assembled. Kind of, here's a recommendation. Set up AWS with EKS and this type of node pools and these subnets and those VPCs. That's your starting point. So I would say even further, right? Use AWS templates of sorts to get your first EKS cluster.
But you wouldn't tell people, yeah, you don't need to use EKS. AWS doesn't know what they're doing. Just go do kops. It's easier for you to manage long term.
I like the templates thing. I think that even when you do know what you're doing and you have years of experience of running Kubernetes in AWS, what's not, still use EKS. It sounds like such a waste of time for us to solve solved problems instead of focusing on the problems of our business. I think that that's the critical part, right? Every minute I spend more than necessary on managing EKS cluster is a minute I wasted on building whatever our product is.
So moving on to the next item, endorsing monthly cost tracking meetings. I'm going to disagree with this one. I don't think this is a good idea. What I do believe is it should be tracked in real time, not monthly. Because what happens when you have a runaway egress fee all of a sudden of $100,000?
Exactly. I mean, that's part of observability. That's not much different than if you change that sentence and said, what happens when an application all of a sudden jumps from using 2 gigabytes of memory to 20 gigabytes of memory, right? You don't solve those things on a monthly meeting. You get notified when things happen and you react at that very moment, right? Now, apart from that, so you should be looking for anomalies in cost in real time, or not looking with your eyes, but get some kind of alerts, notification, something like that. But then it is true that every once in a while we should reevaluate our costs, right? Oh, is it really a good idea to use AWS Lambda beyond the technical reasons, right? Because sometimes those two can be conflicting. You can say, hey, technically this makes sense, but actually maybe I should do something else because this is too expensive. And that makes sense to have in some sort of meetings and to evaluate with heads those decisions. I'm not sure that I would do it monthly though, because to me that sounds too frequently, right?
Okay, so here's what my true thought on monthly is. I think monthly is fine, but only as a postmortem or just a quick sanity check based on everything that's been happening daily. You're thinking monthly is too much. It should be quarterly?
I'm thinking both. So I want to have real-time information. I want to know when there is an anomaly in the cost of something, right? Just as I want to know about any other type of anomaly. So I'm going to both extremes. I want real-time, as you mentioned, but then I want some kind of a meeting to evaluate strategic decisions, right? Kind of, is RDS the right choice for us over maybe managed database by somebody else, or maybe self-managed database, right? And for those type of strategic decisions, I'm not sure that it's necessary to be every month, right? Because hopefully we don't make those types of strategic decisions very often.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. I think we're both going to weigh in the same on this one. They regret not using functions as a service more. I still can't justify. Yes, it's really granular. They go into this in the post. Really granular for how much it's costing you. The problem is, just like what we were talking, if all of a sudden you had a runaway, you may not be making payroll next week.
Function service has both the financial and the technical component. I'm guessing that you're talking more about technical, and I would agree. And the financial component in it, right? But there is a technical also that functions as a service are great for specific types of workloads, right? He mentioned when he was talking about, was it serverless or functions? Functions as a service, yes. Functions as a service are very specific type of technology that works well with very specific workloads, period. So I don't know what more means in his case, whether that means from, 10% of workloads to 90, and I think that in most cases that's just silly. Let's say that I have a workload that processes, 10,000 requests a second. I would never move that to functions as a service. Never. Makes no sense. Have 10,000 instances every second of something and pay for it? Absolutely not. That does not mean that I'm against functions as a service. I think that functions as a service is great, just as many other things are great, but we need to understand what's it great for.
Well, you have to know. And until you've actually had to pay the bill, you won't know. This is one of those earlier things that you have to understand what kind of workload you have. Is it worth trying out? Absolutely. I think both Victor and I will agree on that. Is it worth trying out? Because what you may thought was going to be a really hot thing ended up only running maybe 500 times a month. And that 500 times a month was only going to be $5. I don't want to maintain a server for a $5 process.
Yeah, or much more than that. But the point is, and you're right on that one, you must be using functions as a service. It would be silly not to use it. We can just debate how much.
Speaking of how much, we have our friends back with us today from Barbaro Mojo, and I bet you need a new refill of some Cuban hot sauce. Are you ready to spice up your life while you optimize either your regrets or your enjoyments? Meet Barbaro Mojo, the delicious Cuban hot sauce with a kick that's sponsoring today's episode. Barbaro Mojo brings the heat with their unique Cuban marinade base, adding an unforgettable flavor to your favorite dishes. With flavors like El Habanero, Halibo, Panazzo, and Best Day Ever, there's a perfect match for everyone's taste buds. As a DevOps Paradox listener, you're entitled to an exclusive 25% discount on your first order. Just visit barbaromojo.com and use the promo code DevOps25, that's DevOps, the number 2 and the number 5, at checkout to claim your discount. And thanks to Barbaro Mojo for sponsoring today's episode. So, getting back to this post, they endorsed GitOps.
I don't know anybody who seriously tried GitOps, beyond POC, and regretted it. 4 things that go to Kubernetes, to make it clear. Not for everything. Again, this is a story like functions as a service, right? But it is the most natural way to synchronize stuff into Kubernetes. So to me, that's. I would be surprised if he said anything but endorse. I would discredit the whole article if he said anything else.
Is 2024 the year of GitOps, even though it's not going to be the year of Linux desktop?
Honestly, whenever I speak with companies that are using seriously Kubernetes, it's always there. It's probably the only thing that I can reliably say, I know you have it without you telling me that you have it, right? Everything else, I need to poke and see whether a company has or doesn't have and whether it's using or not and stuff like that. But if you're a heavy Kubernetes user, which not everybody is, but if you are, then I can safely say I know you're using GitOps. Probably. Not literally everybody, but close.
Is there still a reason, if you're container-based on Kubernetes today, that you should not be using GitOps?
I cannot see any reason beyond we could not adapt our way of operating and working to it. Because it requires certain mental and physical adaptation, right? But beyond that, I cannot imagine a reason.
You have two basic tools that you can use today. I mean, there's more than that, but two of the big ones. I'm going to state it this way, Argo CD and Flux. Am I incorrect in stating those two, right? So you have a choice.
That's probably 95%.
Right? That's 95%, and they both go at it in different ways.
There are different technical implementations with certain differences, but conceptually, they're doing the same thing. And conceptually, what it meant, when you go beyond, hey, this is the type of YAML I write for Flux, and this is the YAML I write for Argo CD, and some weird differences like whether it applies Helm charts directly or it converts them into YAML first and then applies them. There are some differences like that, but conceptually, they're the same. And conceptually, what they do is, I watch this repository and this directory in that repository, and whatever is there will be in this cluster. That's what they do. That's all there is to it.
That's still the hardest thing for some people to get their head around. It's like, I'm watching this, and I'm going to make it so.
The harder thing is actually SDLC, right? Because of the not synchronous nature of it, right? So let's say that you have right now, let's say that before GitOps, right? We have a pipeline, you build, you test, you deploy, then you do something else, and so on and so forth, right? And now you're saying you build, you test, you push to Git, and you don't know when it's going to be deployed. You don't know when to continue with the rest of your SDLC. And that's the problem. That's the thing that people need to wrap their heads around. Unless, and this is, I think, very common, the deployment is the last step of your life cycle, which I believe is terribly wrong. But it's not uncommon.
Not uncommon. It should be one of the very first things that you do, even if it's just hello world. Because if you can prove you can get a container into a namespace in a cluster on specific nodes, then when you actually put the real code there, it's a non-event.
No, but what I meant more when I said last step in SDLC, I mean, we don't do anything after deployment. And I would argue that after deployment, you still should run some tests, and you should do this, and you should that. That's not where your SDLC stops.
So I was wrong. That's fine. Just like I should be listening closer. Yes, once you deployed, people are going to be hitting your application, you hope. Or maybe you don't hope so. I don't know. Maybe you don't want people using your application. But you should be testing. Can we say it this way? You should be testing it all the time.
That's called observability today, right?
It is. You should always be logging in. You should always be clicking the pathways of what normal is.
Correct. And just to make it clear, it's not that with GitOps we cannot do the steps after deployment, after synchronization. It's just that that's somehow done differently because you don't know when it starts, you don't know when it ends.
Let's move on to a couple of more of the regrets that are here. So again, there's endorse, regret, and unsure was the third one that I missed. Another big regret was multiple applications sharing a database. Now, this is 2024. This has never been a good thing since the 80s.
I would not say that. So there was a time and place when running multiple databases was a significant cost, both in time investment and money, right? So let's say that we move back in time and say Oracle database, right? Am I going to run Oracle database server, just to be clear what we're talking about here? I'm guessing that he's talking about servers, not databases, or maybe I'm wrong. Am I wrong? Tell me.
He said a single database, not database servers. So we're just talking about databases themselves.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If it's databases, then yeah, there was never a good reason to do that. Never.
Yeah.
I'm changing my mind. Yeah. I mean, you can have multiple databases in a server, but one application, one database, period.
Yeah. Having a single schema to rule them all. What do we used to call those? Universal data stores, UDSs. Don't do that. That's just a bad idea.
No. It was never, that never really worked. At least in my experience, the reasons for doing those things are similar reasons to many other things that we were doing, is that it's simply more convenient, right? So for example, my application needs to get this data, and your application happens not to have an API. And so how do I get that? Oh, the easiest way to get the data is by querying the database. And maybe I need to put some data, and the easiest way to put some data is to the database. I think it's laziness or frustration by other people's applications, specifically APIs.
Let me spell it out a little bit more blunt. You've decided to go down the microservice route. Great. You've decided you're going to have 20 microservices. Great. Each one of those microservices maps to 1 to 5 tables. Great. Except there's only 7 tables in the database. And you've got 20 microservices pointing at a total of 7 tables in a database. Get ready for chaos to ensue.
Doesn't even have to be microservices. Let's say 2 monoliths. 1 database. That's still 1 database less than it should be.
You've got to be really, really smart and have some really tight controls if you're going to be sharing databases, or the way they phrased it here, a shared database. It's hard.
That's the problem with shared databases, is that they're often born because you don't have tight control. If you had tight control, you would have the proper communication between applications. Unless by tight control you mean tight control on database and not tight anywhere else.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to a few others before we start wrapping up. This one's actually going to go back to an endorse. Now, we haven't talked about vendor names. We talked about PagerDuty or Datadog or whoever it was, and we threw some names around. This is sort of a very polite slam, I think. They endorsed moving off of Jira onto Linear. Now, I've never touched Linear, don't know anything about it, but moving off Jira to something else, to me, still feels a very good thing.
You know, I never saw, I never heard, I never used Linear, and I already like it. Just the fact that it's not Jira.
That's all we need to say about that. Now, okay, let's be real about it. Jira is
Now,
is
Atlassian,
great.
if you want to sponsor this podcast, we are open to it.
Yeah, we're open. But the Jira is great if you have nothing else. It is going to be better than a spreadsheet. It's just how do you implement it? Because you can hurt yourself with Jira.
Actually, Jira is not that bad at all. And now I'm going back to the beginning of our conversation. If it wouldn't incentivize you to go beyond the out-of-the-box experience and start creating your own madness there, right? I don't have necessarily a problem with Jira as is. I have problem is that I never saw Jira as is. It's always somebody's hands were involved there to make everybody's life miserable when Jira usage is concerned. It's not that much complaint of Jira as a product, but rather every single Jira implementation I've seen.
Once humans start touching Jira, that's usually where the problems start. Let's go ahead and move on down to the next regret. Not using OpenTelemetry early. I will go ahead and read out the first sentence. We started sending off metrics directly to Datadog using Datadog's API. This has made it very hard to rip them out.
Yes. But now, depends when that was happening. I will assume based on that text that they started doing that when OpenTelemetry was already a thing. Because if it was before OpenTelemetry was a thing, then all I can say is I understand why you did it, because you had no alternative.
Well, again, they go on in the second paragraph. OpenTelemetry wasn't as mature 4 years ago, but it's gotten much better. So if you're starting out in 2024 as a startup today and you're going to be sending metrics, traces, and logs somewhere, see if OpenTelemetry will work for you. All the big providers are supporting it now. All of them.
Look, if OpenTelemetry doesn't work for you today, with excluding maybe logging, then there's something wrong with you. And when I say it doesn't work for you, companies have the tendency to say, this is 95% of what I need. It's not 100. Hence, I will not use it. Now, I don't think that we should stop what we're doing and adapt to something else all the time. But if it's mostly what you need, then that's good enough. And there is no justification for you to say, I'm going to drop it because of that.
So if you haven't looked at OpenTelemetry yet, we've talked about it a lot in the past. Now's a good time to be looking at it. 4 years ago, maybe not so much. But now, definitely worth looking at. Another endorsement was going to Kubernetes. I imagine you're going to disagree with that, right?
He regretted Kubernetes or endorsed it?
He endorsed it.
Yeah, then we're on the same page. Then we're fine. No beef with you. Assuming that you're a certain size, if you're a smaller company or something, go Google Cloud Run, go Lambda, go do it fast. Don't go into Kubernetes madness. But once you reach certain level, of course.
Now, one regret they had was using sealed secrets to manage Kubernetes secrets.
I agree. I mean, I'm fond of sealed secrets. I like sealed secrets. But sealed secrets are, again, good for certain size. When we go serious, we start putting secrets in a secrets manager. And then I haven't went that far into the article, but I hope that he mentioned the external secrets as alternative.
And that is the follow-on to that point, is to use external secrets.
External secrets had until a year ago, give or take, had one big problem for me personally, is that you could pull secrets, you could not push. Now that's solved, you can push secrets as well. And now it's external secrets and secret manager, that's it. When Kubernetes is concerned. And if I can plug here something, if it's not Kubernetes, then Teller.
That makes sense. I think the sealed secrets was a solution for a time, but that time has passed.
It still is, right? It's a similar conversation if we would have about, let's say, service mesh, right? Should you use service mesh? Of course you should. But only when you're on a certain level, right? Kind of don't complicate your life with the service mesh. If you're a small shop and what's not, I would say the same thing with secrets, right? The sealed secrets work fairly well in smaller settings, right? But then comes the time that that's not good enough anymore.
Define smaller settings.
Couple of 100 people company.
That doesn't have a standalone security arm as well?
Yeah, I assume that with, let's say 100 people is still not serious about security. I know that some are forced to be, some are, but when you're 100 people, security is still not your primary concern. You're still trying to figure out what the heck are you doing in the first place, right? And when you're trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish in the first place, then the more noise you can remove, the better. And security is something extremely important, but it's also noise. Noise in terms of, I wouldn't, at the small setup, I would rather have another developer or product manager trying to help us figure out what are we doing in the first place than hire a couple of CISOs.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on from secrets to our last one that was endorsed. It was using Homebrew for company scripts. Now they have a mix of Linux and Mac, so Homebrew works. I imagine with your recent love of Nix Shell specifically, you're in agreement with this as well?
To begin with, for company scripts, I'm not even sure what he meant by Homebrew. If he meant installing stuff. To begin with, is Homebrew working on Linux now, Darin?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that the thing? Okay.
That is a thing.
I'm not informed. Yeah, I mean, it's... So I prefer Nix. I think it's a superior solution to anything else. But I do agree that we should have, hey, to work on this is what needs to be available, right? Whether that's through script or whatever, but I need to have a way to get all the packages of CLI or application, everything needs to be readily available for me. And I don't think that we should be having infinite number of if-else statements. Oh, if it's Linux is this, if it's Windows is that, if it's Mac is that, I don't know what. So having, among other things, a single package manager is awesome. Absolutely awesome. Now, again, I prefer Nix, but a single Homebrew is better than a bit of this, bit of that.
Well, there's even a point to where Nix isn't going to work, and that's going to be in the casks. So if you wanted to install Slack, you're not going to do that with Nix.
Yeah, I'm assuming that that's not what he meant, I hope.
Well, he said scripts and binaries. So I'm taking it as both. Here's how I'm using it. I'm going down your path now. Anything that's an app that's in the applications folder on macOS, and if there is a brew formula for it, I'm going to use that. But if it's not a cask, and it's something I can do with Nix, I'm going to do Nix.
I tend to divide it in a different way, and it somehow ends up being the same as what you said, is whatever is project specific, that's Nix. Whatever is my laptop just needs, like a browser, VS Code, I don't have such a strong need to uniformity across this or that, right? This is for my whole machine. Homebrew is fine because I'm on Mac. I just found out that works in Linux as well, right? That would be the division. So I have 5, 6, 7 applications, maybe 10 on my laptop that are in applications folder now, and that's Homebrew.
So that's all we're going to take a look at in this post. Again, the link to this post is going to be down in the episode description. And if you would like to discuss it more, then go ahead and head on over to the Slack workspace, go to the podcast channel, look for the posting about episode 258, that's what we're on today, and leave your comments there.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.